MIDDLEKAUFF! Hey, hey! What's up, everybody? Welcome. It is another edition of Haberman and MIDDLEKAUFF. It's another edition of Haberman and MIDDLEKAUFF. Glad you're here. We are live on YouTube on Monday. I am now in the same time zone as John. Daylight savings.
Suck losing an hour?
Son of a bitch! And
I'm at a disadvantage. I felt a huge advantage getting an extra hour on Pacific Standard Time.
Yeah.
I have lost my
You
advantage.
lost your advantage.
Yeah.
Well, you're still ahead for like another week till everyone else adjusts. It is NFL free agency frenzy on every channel on your TV. And we got a lot to get to. If you're listening to this podcast, that's great. We appreciate it. Leave us a review, Apple Podcasts, 5 stars. Leave a question in that review. That's how you get in the Haberman and MIDDLEKAUFF mailbag, also known as HAM, H-A-M, Haberman and MIDDLEKAUFF. Also, if you're watching the YouTube, our podcast is down in the description below. You can check it out that way.
Ladies of the desert, he's coming. He's cruising across fucking state lines, coming to Sin City, baby. That jawline, that smile, that couple grays on the side. Jimmy G.
Salty. Salt and pepper. Our buddy Sam Esfandiari from Warriors Light Years pod, thank you. Texted me and he said, bigger Mark Davis smile, John Gruden presser or Jimmy Garoppolo presser? And I said, well, the difference is Jimmy is going to go to every Aces game that Mark invites him to. Whereas John had other things going on.
I don't see Jimmy G being an ace. Geez.
Are you
a little too big to go to a WNBA game? Jimmy Garoppolo?
Oh, he is 100% at an Aces game. There is no question he's at an Aces game.
Golden Knights, I don't know, man. Jimmy Garoppolo's kind of fucking big time, man.
John, Aces get you more run than a Golden Knights game. Without question. Oh. People, you tell us who's right here. I think Jimmy sitting courtside at an Aces game gets him more
Are you
attention.
being serious right now or being sarcastic?
I'm being 100% serious. I think him being at an Aces game will get him more attention than being at a Golden Knights game.
Like on social media or like
just however you get attention. All the ways you get attention. Yeah. That's a bigger story than going to a Golden Knights game.
I do make a lot of fun about Mark Davis owning the Aces, but the WNBA is on the irrelevant scale about as low as you get.
John, I'm telling you, if you take him at both games, he's getting more attention than an Aces game.
I don't know, man.
That's my take.
Yeah, I'm gonna do hard
it's hockey.
disagree.
It's dark. No one sees where you're sitting. It's court.
Yeah, remember Taylor Luan when they were drinking beers, the Nashville Predators games? Like
if Jimmy chugs beers, then he'll go viral. Otherwise, there will be a photo of. It's hard to get pictures of people sitting courtside at ice rinks.
No, he'd be in a suite.
A box. See, it's not the same. On the floor. Kelsey Plum's going to come over and give him a fist pound. And
no one listening knows who that is. I met her. Nice lady, but
Kelsey's. When did you meet? Yeah, Kelsey's great. I'm just telling you, it's more. You get more attention for that, especially it's with Mark. So him and Mark together are gonna get those.
If he's sitting with Mark, yes, that picture.
Of course, he's sitting with Mark. Why wouldn't he be sitting with Mark? He's 100% sitting with Mark.
Too much WNBA talk.
It's on, John. It's not WNBA talk. It's Jimmy talk. And the world eats that up. The world eats it up. All right. Jimmy's a Raider for actually good contract, $34 million guaranteed. Pretty good contract for the Raiders. I saw Derek sign this weekend. Did you get a picture of Derek?
Oh, I watched the press conference.
Yeah, what'd you think?
I mean, they got a grown up. I mean, for them, it was a big deal to get Derek Carr.
Yeah. All right, big news of Monday. And I do think it was the big news of Monday in the NFL. A couple other big signings, too. Jimmy obviously being one. When Aaron Rodgers happens, it happens. But the 49ers signed Javon Hargrave. 11 sacks, one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. Turned 30 on February 7th. $40 million guaranteed on a 4-year, $84 million contract. And the question is, how good is he? The debate has already begun. Is this the best interior line in the NFL? Maybe the Niners or the Commanders. And so John went to the phone You went to the scouts and the front office people. Well, actually, I don't know exactly who. You can tell us who. What are people around the league saying about Javon Hargrave? What's the scouting report?
Well, I went right to the source. I went to people that work for the Eagles. One, the number one thing that came across from a couple guys were, this is a high character, like locked and loaded human being. You know, and sometimes you never know with defensive line because you actually kind of want them a little crazier. I got rave reviews from the guy, high level worker, just constant studs. You know, now that is separate from the basically 18 and a half sacks he's had the last 2 years. Like, he's a fantastic player. Then I got an independent arbitrator on another team who they said they sniffed around, and once he got to about $20 million a year, you know, for a guy in his third contract, he's 30 years old. It's a lot of money. So I think antennas went up around the league that he was going to be playing in that kind of the deep end of the pool when it came to contracts. $20 million a year in a third contract for a defensive tackle, like, this is that the league has boomed, but that's a lot of money. So the 49ers, you know, one, character clearly matters to them. Like, I don't think they're signing a guy to a lot of money. Think about where the last two guys they've signed: the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles, right? I mean, back-to-back years, their biggest free agents have came to elite teams.
Yeah.
From a playing standpoint, one thing I heard is when Howie signed this guy 3 years ago, or 3.5, whatever the math is, you know, he was on the Eagles for 3 seasons.
Yeah.
Is that in Pittsburgh, he was a really, really good run player, and he's really developed as a great one-on-one pass rusher. Because the knock on him is he's shorter, a little shorter and stout. Like, he does not look like Buckner, Armstead, Fletcher Cox. He's much more of a compact defensive lineman. But I guess, I mean, if you watch the Eagles, you watch him. He's a great one-on-one pass rusher, and interior pass rush now. I mean, you get $20 million a year. I mean, you get double-digit sacks. Now, like the Eagles, the 49ers, in theory, I mean, we know Bosa's great, but should have a really good defensive line. I'm sure they'll be signing guys, drafting guys. Hopefully Drake Jackson comes on. We've seen Armstead before. When he has help next to him, he becomes a better player. So the pass rush, they like a guy to get right up the field. But in terms of play strength, effort, talent, I just got a lot of the total package. And then again,
wow. So his only drawback is his age. Would that be fair to say, or is that?
I think it's an immediate like quarterback, maybe some wide receiver type guys. Anytime you get a big, heavy offensive or defensive lineman third contract, it just makes people a little nervous. Now, as you alluded to before we hopped on, he was not a first-round pick, so it was a contract extension, or I mean, his contract from the Eagles came after his 4th season. So he's been in the league 7 years, right? You know, the wear and tear on the body. It's not like he's a 9-year player getting the second contract.
Yeah.
That happened before to like Richard Sherman when the 49ers got him, right? He was, when you're not a first-round pick, you just hit the market or get extended sometimes a little earlier. But yeah, I mean, I think he was beloved in Philly. Again, Philly stud, legend, worth every penny. Worth every penny. And this is a team like the 49ers who have one goal next year: win the NFC again, right? Like, that's their mindset. You get to a point. I think one major difference is Philadelphia has a quarterback that's going to get a shitload of money, right? And the 49ers are still lucky they're in this period where that they can allocate those funds because they got 2 quarterbacks that combine to make about $8 million. Now, we'll see by the time you listen to this, maybe they've signed a backup. That backup market usually plays out over a couple days, but this is also like Tom Brady. I don't know if he would have got $40 million, but he would have got 20 or 25, right? You know, this is that they were able to allocate this money non-quarterback. So I think one thing the 49ers do a really good job of, they either have a connection with you, like in Trent, but if they sign you as a free agent, the character stuff really matters. Mm-hmm. And I would say historically, some guys that have been broken off that have failed have not, like, they don't fit right whenever they get to a place because they're just talented. They're not a buy-in guy. They get paid. And I would say the last two guys coming from those areas, anytime you sign people from certain organizations, the Steelers, the Ravens, I think what the Eagles have become, Patriot guys, Packer guys, you're getting pretty focused cats. And the 49ers are not fucking around, right? Just like if you go sign with the Eagles, they're not going to be fucking around. If you sign with, the Steelers or the Ravens, like this shit's very seriously. This is not like, oh, maybe we break through and compete to make the playoffs, like sign with the Lions or something. Like, no, our goal is here to win 12, 13 games and to make fucking a run. Like I saw the Chiefs sign somebody. You sign with the Chiefs, you better be locked and loaded to win, right?
They signed the tackle from the Jags, Javon.
Yeah. But like that guy signs, like the standard for all these guys that sign with the really good teams is really high. Because you're coming in there, like last year when they signed Ward, it was a double whammy. We give you a lot of money, we think highly of you, but you got to play well, and our expectations as a team are as high as it gets. And that's not easy.
I wonder if the Eagles might have valued the fact that he thrived with the Steelers before, right? This guy didn't just play for Philly, he played for Pittsburgh, where the standard is the same.
Yeah.
Right? Or historically higher. But so he's played for the Steelers, he's played for the Eagles. That's a great reflection. His 30-year-old age, by the way, he just turned 30. So he played last year at 29. I think February 7th was his birthday. PFF had him ranked as the third pass rushing defensive tackle. His 11 sacks is top 4 among defensive tackle sacks. And remember, the Niners, and Kawakami wrote this. Now, Eric Armstead had 2 postseason sacks, but he was hurt during the regular season. Armstead and Kinlaw last year combined for 0 regular season sacks.
Is that good?
No, it's not. We'll get to the Kinlaw aspect of it. You get Armstead back and you pair this guy with Armstead. And the way I love when the Niners get defensive tackles, because you just, for the most part, believe that you're going to get their best out of them. That's why the Kinlaw thing, in some ways, the logic of it made sense, because you're like, we're going to give this ball a mold of clay to Chris Kasarik. But the injuries were a whole thing. But this guy, and here's the other thing, you just played against him, right?
Yeah.
Like you had a really detailed scouting report from several people that know the guy well. I bet the Niners had extremely detailed scouting report on the player as well, because he just had 4 or 5 QB hurries in that NFC Championship game, but he played well in that game. It's kind of a similar blueprint, right? The Eagles and Niners kind of follow similar blueprints defensively.
Listen, what I give Kyle a lot of respect on is for being an offensive coach. And I think he has some parallels. They do it completely differently in terms of their scheme and the way I think they kind of think about football in terms of offensively. But I think the way they view team building, I think him and Andy Reid have a lot of similarities. Like, what did the Chiefs do today? Offensive tackle. Like, they invest in the big
Lost
heavies.
one, signed one.
That means a lot to them, the big heavies. And Philadelphia historically just copied what Andy taught them, and they continue to double down. The big heavies. You separate yourself in the line of scrimmage, because when you have a great play caller, you can find guys 2nd, 3rd round and develop them into studs. Kelsey, 3rd rounder, Tyreek Hill, 5th rounder, Deebo Samuel, 2nd rounder, Kittle. You can do that, and you can get scrap heap level. A Juju Smith out the scrap heap, or a 7th round pick, Jawan Jennings. But you can't it's very hard to find Hargrave. Just like it's very hard to find Chris Jones or Nick Bosa. And when you do, then you have to build around them and develop guys around them, because it's easier, right? Like, ultimately, if I have Justin Jefferson or Devontae Adams, they can just independent. Like the Raiders had a disastrous season, yet Devontae fucking dominated, right? Where with the defensive linemen, like Bosa obviously is an elite player, but their defensive line as a whole is pretty damn good. Like Hargrave, the Eagles, 11 sacks. Well, beside Bosa and like Micah Parsons, they had the 3rd best passer. Like, you need talent around you to excel, because you can't just have Bosa and then Haberman, Middlekoff, and Williamson. You need, when the Niners had the best defensive line in football, they had 4, guys worth $15 to $20 million. The way D Ford, we could argue, but Buckner, the way Armstead played that year, and obviously Nick was a rookie, you're so much better off when you have a group, right? I think the Eagles and the Niners different on their offensive lines. Like, the Niners have Trent, but then they had a couple of other young guys coming on, a right tackle, which somehow just got $50 million, where the Eagles just top to bottom, left to right. It's like, God, they're just good at every position. it helps. And that is a point of differentiation because it's the one area in football that still has parallels to like the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s where you can be really, really physical, right? It's like the area where you can still if you talk to like a right guard or a defensive tackle, they wouldn't tell you, yeah, I feel pretty good after the game, right? Not allowed to hit here. So I'm all for investing. And this is possible because they have rookie quarterback contracts. And I think the Eagles lost him because Jalen's, you got to pay him. I don't think the Eagles, like, if you would have said, hey, you can pay Jalen, do this, and keep him. Like, they didn't want to lose him.
Right.
Like, I think the Niners were cool with losing McGlinchey. Obviously. I don't think this is the Eagles don't feel good about this.
They just have no
He's
choice.
one of their best players. They have no choice.
For every year where there's the salary cap isn't real, jokes go flying. The salary cap is real, and it shows that it's real repeatedly for teams. It's showing for the Rams right now. It's real. We've had a few people on the stream say that how's the audio right now? Because I just checked that it sounds okay to me. I'm not hearing an issue, but I'm not listening nonstop like everybody else is.
Yeah, I don't.
So has it fixed itself? Is my question for the chat. I just checked it and it sounded okay. People are commenting like it's fine now, so we'll continue on. Better now? Good. Sounds fine. Okay, good. I saw Mike Silver today tweeted that the Niners, in given $40 million to Hargrave, guaranteed $84 million over 4, that they could have done that contract in 2020 for DeForest Buckner, chose not to, lost Buckner, who's 2 years younger. And my thought to it, not my response, but my thought was, well, I think you can look at Hargrave in the context of DeForest Buckner, because today the 49ers don't have a $25 million a year quarterback. In 2020, they had a $25 million a year quarterback, and it made the finances are just different. Part of the reason you can sign Javon Hargrave is because your quarterback is either an $8 million quarterback or a $900,000 quarterback. The two of them combined cost less than half of what Jimmy Garoppolo was costing during the DeForest Buckner situation. So DeForest Buckner, this is not hindsight on Buckner. You lost the player you lost. He's gone. But this is not evidence that you could have signed DeForest Buckner.
Well, in 2020, it was a double whammy. The salary cap was $180 million. So just factor in you had an expensive quarterback, and the salary cap was dramatically smaller than it is. It's $226 million, I think I saw the other day, that every team had to get to by today, obviously, officially, or maybe by the 15th, but I think there was a date last week. So the math, it's not in a vacuum. You can't make that point, because the reason they did that is they could trade him. One, at the time, right, they added the 13th overall pick, and I celebrated the deal because the way big picture they were being built, like, kind of made sense. If one guy was going to be expendable, and the price point in which you got a guy, which at the time, pretty sure he'd never made a Pro Bowl. Now he's gone on to, maintain his level of play, and some would even say improve a little bit, and he's an elite human being. So it was a tough deal to be made, but this is football. I mean, I think you could argue the two most famous coaches of our lifetime, Walsh and Belichick, one of the things they get the most credit for is, like, God, they wheel and deal. They're always early. They make these shrewd moves. And it's like why they get held to such esteem, not just people that talk or fans, but like people in the league. Like, God, Bill's just what he's always able to do, or Bill Walsh. Belichick just copied Walsh. Sometimes you got to do that. Now, the problem is,
that's a great point.
The problem is they whiffed. They used that pick on a guy that, holy shit, when you see him, you could argue he looks better than the other two guys, and the other two guys are elite-looking defensive linemen, Armstead and Buckner. Last year, you and I were at a practice. He was standing right between Bosa and Armstead, and he's the best looking because he's thicker. He's terrible because his knee's fucked up. He's just, what happened in the NFC Championship game is beyond an embarrassment. So I am pro making the move. You can't do the hindsight because the math doesn't add up. But it cost them because the guy they had can't play because his knee's fucked and he's not any good anymore. Because part of football, and this happens sometimes when you get injured, is like you have to either constantly be improving, right? Like what is Nick Bosa? He's constantly getting better. What happens with Ayuk? He constantly improves. George Kittle constantly improves. Christian McCaffrey felt like he got better and better every week. It's hard to get better when you're never playing. And clearly you probably can't train or work out. So Kinlaw, the body looks sweet, but he can't improve. So if you're not improving, you're just getting worse. And now
It was
he's
a projection even pre-injuries, right?
Say that again.
He was a projection even when he came into the league. So
yeah,
it's not like he's trying to get back to what he once was.
So this was obviously in a vacuum, you would take Javon Hargrave over Kinlaw every day of the week. 3 years ago, you would have taken it. But they had to buy this player because, to me, of Javon Kinlaw. Like if Javon Kinlaw was just a high-end player, I don't know if they make this move, right? He was a guy that you extend him, build around with Bosa. Hopefully Drake Jackson that's kind of your core defensive lineman. You can allocate those resources other places. Maybe you can buy a tackle. Maybe you buy Juwan Jennings, or not Juwan Jennings, but Juwan Taylor. You would allocate, but you had to allocate these resources. Obviously, defensive line is very important because of the dud that you had as the 14th overall pick, and who is just. If I was a betting man right now, a lot of people say you cut him or whatever. There's no point to cutting him because you're on the hook for his money. You just play it out, but you no longer back and forth on IR. You probably he feels inevitable, like IR, see ya, just no longer around, right?
Yeah,
that's what I would bet on right now.
You're not trading him anywhere.
Well, he's got no value. I think the NFC Championship game is an all-time that's like Jamarcus Russell level play. Now you can say it's because of the injury or whatever, but if you're putting the guy out there in an important game and that's what you're getting, there's no coming back from that. That tape guy is it's one thing to go viral on Twitter. That's actual, this is the biggest moment he's getting tossed around. What's his value? There are a lot of random guys that would just try. It looked like he tapped out.
Either he couldn't or he didn't, and neither you can't roll back with either one of those things.
God, he got flung a couple times. He's a 330-pound human being. So you could argue that miss led to this, which is a positive. But,
Well, I would say this, not to go glass half full on it, but to your point on Walsh and your point on Belichick, you do all the things you do if your career is long enough, knowing that some of those draft picks are going to hit and some of those free agents are going to hit and some of them are going to whiff. And to me, it's just like life. It's just about you're not going to ever do it perfectly. So can you respond? Plays after critical errors. And this is how you fix problems. And sometimes you need to be a little lucky. In the case of the Niners, they're lucky their quarterbacks are cheap. But you have to be able to pivot all the time. It's always going to be about pivoting. In life, in business, in drafting, it will never be perfect. You will have to overcome errors, mistakes, injuries, overpays, all of that stuff. And so they pivoted to one of the best players in the NFL. All right. I'm seeing what you're seeing, but
how do I sound? I sound normal to
perfect to me, but obviously there's something going on somewhere. Is it just
I say we just keep rocking?
Is it just John or is it me too? Oh, this will get edited out later, so don't worry about that. But I'm clicking through the video here.
Can you hear it?
A little, but I don't think it's the mic. Maybe it's the internet. But again, you sound great to me as we're going back and forth, and we're also using the internet.
Looks completely normal.
Sounds good to RP.
I changed my mic port.
All right, let's see if that makes a difference.
Yeah,
mic port upgrade.
It's where it's risky sometimes in the comments, though. I would say,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, when I go check the live video, I get a little bit of it. But if John's mic was faulty, I should be hearing it as well on my end, and I'm not hearing it on my end. It's only going out over the YouTube feed, which is what makes it a little bit odd. Both, just John's doing all the talking. So I think it's the YouTube feed. I don't think it's the microphone itself, but like I said, we're getting good audio back and forth. So we'll check it post haste, but keep us posted on that, people. Thank you. Speaking of picks, Mike McGlinchey, what are you grinning about?
Nothing.
Mike McGlinchey signs, maybe it's this that you're grinning about. Mike McGlinchey signs a 5-year, $87.5 million contract with $50 million guaranteed, which I'd say is one of the rare stories that shocks you and doesn't surprise you at the same exact time. I think we all expected him to get a lot of money, but you still have to see it to believe it. And him and Russell Wilson now, John. This will be the man protecting Russell Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not shocked at all because it was clear that the numbers were going to be high. It was clear that he was going to get a lot of money. It's why guys want to hit free agency because you have multiple people bidding on your services, which drives up the price. So, yeah, we're going to make fun of it because it seems insane. And under no circumstances could the 49ers have done this, should have done this, and they did the right thing by never extending him. I even pushed back against the fifth-year option, but he did start the last 2 years on a team that, were plays away. I guess this year they weren't plays away, but I mean, back-to-back NFC Championship games. So he has value as a player. And this, I would say this, Sean Payton is okaying this deal, right? This isn't like, General Patton, this is Sean Payton wants Mike McGlinchey as a starting right tackle. Part of it is like good players don't usually hit free agency at major positions. Now, and they don't have picks, right? That's the other thing. You got to overpay when you've traded these picks away for Russell Wilson. I couldn't get behind it. And I think sometimes when you're closer to the sun, it's a little brighter on us that watch every snap that obviously these guys evaluated it, but their perspective, and they'll give a press conference, and I'm sure, obviously it won't happen today because it's not even official, but like by the end of the week, I bet Sean Payton talks about durability, toughness. He just gives us something we don't have to worry about. Like there is value in things that he brings to the table. And then you just naturally pay there's a reason shitty homes in Malibu that look at the water cost more than like Stockton. There's a reason in Paradise Valley down the street from me, a fucking home that JJ Watt's sitting in costs more than living in Phoenix. And the tackles cost more than linebackers or safeties or tight ends. Like it's just, so the nature of his position, he does bring positive things that coaches value that you, me, and people listening to this right now and 49er fans are just going to see an average athlete who gets smoked by speed.
Yeah, playing with a quarterback who doesn't get rid of the football right now. Like Sean Payton is coming from one of the fastest release times in NFL history, probably, in Drew Brees, right? One of the fastest guys from snap to decision to throw to a guy in Russell that feels like he's not seeing it at all. So is he planning to run the ball a ton and take the ball out of Russ's hands a little bit? Maybe, right? That would, I do wonder, does it give us any insight as to how he's planning to play, or did he just think this is the best right tackle I can afford, and so we are going to be better at this position, even if it costs me a lot of money? Maybe it's that simple. I just have to be a little better at that position, and it's going to cost me money. But, now the Niners need a right tackle because, to your point,
well, we knew that, right?
We did know that. He played a lot of football for them. Now, was it a failed pick? This is a guy who started a bunch of games for a team that won a bunch of games. Colton Miller got drafted several picks later. I'd forgotten, because of the coin flip, that Colton Miller didn't get drafted right after Mike McGlinchey because the Raiders, from what I heard from a Raiders coach that you and I both know, the Raiders liked McGlinchey. The Raiders would have taken McGlinchey. The Niners took him, so then they trade back with Arizona. That's where Josh Rosen goes. And then they get Colton Miller several picks later. And Colton Miller has turned into one of the best right tackles in the NFL. So
the coin flips an all-time Gruden, John Lynch moment. Gruden storms off. He was just coach when they won a Super Bowl.
Classic Shanahan, not there.
No show.
Yeah. It was a classic. Wasn't Rod Woodson the one doing the coin flip?
I think so.
Honorary
I
guy?
think so.
That was the other part of it. Rod was there.
So.
Now, one thing you would say, remember, it's easy to forget this. The Niners, McGlinchey was better right away than Colton Miller was, right?
But wasn't the knock on Colton, and listen, I crushed him early on, he was like a lighter, more of a project who has developed into a very, very solid left tackle.
Now at left tackle, yes. Thank you.
Now at left tackle. But he had to put on some weight. He's a much better athlete, and I think the knock on average to below average tackles, you are going to be at a disadvantage because so many teams it's not even the high end teams have like a Bosa, Parsons, a Reddick. You play the Jags. I mean, they got dudes they've drafted over the years, right? Like Josh Allen. You play the Giants. They got Javon. I mean, every team now has pretty formidable edge rushers that are all fast. So I think you see that with McGlinchey he's just an average athlete, and that's hard. And when you factor in, I think there's a point like it's very, very difficult when you're not an elite athlete at 6'9" to get low enough with these guys that, so many guys can, like when Bosa or Von Miller or Micah Parsons, when they're turning the edge, think how low they are. And McGlinchey he's like a power forward. So it's very difficult. Like what makes Trent so special is, he's big, 6'6" or whatever, but also, even at his age, an elite, fluid athlete that can bend and move. And you see that with Lane Johnson. You just see that with the really good tackles is you got to be able to do that. And that's where context in this argument matters, right? Like McGlinchey and Kinlaw are not the same, but neither guy is getting a second contract with the 49ers. So anytime that you draft a guy, you could argue in the first round, but I would say the top 15 picks, McGlinchey was 9, Kinlaw was 14. When you pull the trigger on that pick, you are hoping he is a multiple contract in the NFL. Like, 8 years in the NFL is probably like 14 in the NBA. Like he's going to be a stalwart on your team for, the prime of his career. Right. And that's where you have to say it's a whiff. Because when they draft McGlinchey 9, this guy's going to be good enough to be one of our core guys. That's why it's one thing to let Hargrave, Steelers, draft a guy, not in the first round, depend on how your cap works. You don't have the money. I bet they would have looked back. God, we probably would have liked to keep him looking back. Maybe they underestimated how good he could become, which happens. That would be the difference. Like ultimately, I think what people would on the Philly would tell you is we love the guy and he was even better than we expected. I have a hard time seeing McGlinchey is it a ceiling did he peak a couple of years ago and this is just who he is? How does he ever be McGlinchey made that Pro Bowl, not like a fake Pro Bowl, but was one of the better right tackles in the league? I have a hard time seeing that, though he's paid like one.
But I think what you said to start the point is the right point. Like Kinlaw and McGlinchey are not equal, even though you would probably do them both over. You would do the McGlinchey one over and take Colton Miller. You would. If you did the Kinlaw one over, I don't know who you would draft. There wasn't another defensive tackle in the realm of that range, right? In terms of being another first-round guy, there wasn't anybody really close. I'd have to go back and look. I don't know if there was another elite defensive tackle in the whole draft.
Honestly, what you probably do is
I don't think there was.
You just take Ayuk there and you take another position a little later. Or, I mean, Justin Jefferson, probably.
Yes, if we're redoing
if you could do it over again, you take Justin Jefferson. But if we were redoing the draft, Justin Jefferson would never be there.
Yeah. Only you get to redo the draft. So you're it's like Back to the Future. Only you know.
Again, he's a solid player.
You might take an offensive lineman with that pick. But
yeah, I think one thing that hurts his value is when he's missed game, it doesn't feel like they skip a beat. Now, they've won games when Trent's been out. They've won games when Joe Staley's been out. It doesn't mean they can't win, but obviously, you can't sustain without Trent. I think it's very easy to – McGlinchey's much more of a replaceable player. Like, the 49ers have some irreplaceable players, right? Like, what Kittle brings to the table, what Bosa brings to the table, what Trent brings to the table, what Fred brings to the table. McGlinchey just doesn't fall under that. It's why that they probably figured out maybe, when they picked up the fifth-year option, more likely than not, he was never going to be the long-term solution.
Yeah, but they also understood the market, that it was going to be hard for them to upgrade at that position
Well, what they would tell you probably is right. They paid him 10-8 this year on his 5th-year option. Look at what his worth is worth. Like that's what he just got. So
Yeah.
we go, listen, it was a short-term fix. In fairness, he knew it. He was always very open about it. But we got a bargain.
Yeah.
Where I was wrong is I said I would never have picked up the 5th-year option. It worked out pretty well.
But if they had a limitless amount of cap space, they wouldn't have re-signed him for $50 million guaranteed.
No chance.
They were ready to move on.
Well, because based on being this close to the sun, he's not worth that, right? He's worth more to someone else than he is to you, right? Even though clearly John and Kyle like this guy a lot. I remember John talked about him either at the end of the year press conference or maybe at the combine. And I think, and maybe it was with like Papa, they always got a little offended because everyone shits on him, that he's better than just the one clip a week that goes viral. Yeah. And there's some fairness there. It's just hard to that's his low point. It can get someone killed because that position is just on a weekly basis. I mean, next year they play the NFC East again, right? So they're getting Reddick. They're getting Micah Parsons. Let's just, we'll see. Joe Staley thinks he's a flash player, and he's right. But maybe Kayvon's a little better, right? The Commanders they just paid a defensive tackle a ton of money, and they got Chase Young coming back, so they got fucking firepower.
Deron Payne just became the highest paid tackle other than Aaron Donald in NFL history.
What did he get guaranteed? 60?
Yeah, 60.
A lot younger than Hargrave.
Yeah, I mean, he was the 13th pick in the 2018 draft. He was drafted after McGlinchey. If you could do it over, you take Payne there, and then you take Wirfs instead of Kinlaw.
No, was McGlinchey the 18 draft?
Was he not? I don't have it in front of me if you're looking at it.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, if you do it over again, you take Deron Payne right there.
But it doesn't work like that. And the whole thing is, I just think it's all about pivoting off of making the most of what you have and then pivoting off of any mistakes. Jimmy Garoppolo signs with the Raiders. 6 years, $67.5 million.
6 years?
Sorry, did I say 6? 3 years, $67.5 million for Garoppolo.
Maybe we would be going to
guaranteed. Here's the deal. Here's the retrospective Jimmy Garoppolo on the Niners. Acquired for a second rounder in 2017. Paid $122 million over 5.5 years, which is about $22 million per. He goes to a Super Bowl, and his team goes to 2 other NFC title games. And before you say, well, Jimmy didn't take him to the title game in 2022, Jimmy won more games than any other 49ers quarterback did in 2022. He was 7-3 as a starter. Although you could argue Brock won the Dolphins game, that's 6, and Brock won in the playoffs, but 2 playoff games, so that's 8. So Brock won more games. But the point is, as good as we all think, as good as Brock was, not think he was, Jimmy did win 7 games for him. So I give Jimmy, on his resume, he gets 2 NFC title games plus a Super Bowl. I'd say for $22 million and a second round pick, you know what? You got your value out of Jimmy Garoppolo.
I think his value, it's a little skewed in the sense they got him back this year for 6.5, so it drives down that overall average.
But they needed him.
Yeah, it's got to be one of the more bizarre careers we're ever going to see. It rarely happens this way. It just does, right? Because Kirk Cousins and Dak would sell their left nut to have 4 playoff victories, multiple NFC championship. Can you imagine if Dak, starting quarterback for the Cowboys, and they had just got multiple times in the NFC championship game, the way we'd view them? I mean, the Cowboys haven't been there, and it's going on almost 3 decades. So now Jimmy, he's clearly not as good as they had hoped. And he's definitely was never as good, beside a couple individual games, as I would say what we anticipated that 5-game stretch that led to the contract. Now, at the time, and even over the years, I'll stumble on a podcast or people arguing, did the Niners have to give him all that money? I think at the time, which, what was it, $70 million guaranteed? And like most quarterbacks, the guarantee, they're not a defensive lineman. They're not a wide receiver. If they are just serviceable, they play out the contract. Most people at Jimmy Garoppolo's contract, like the guaranteed money and then the extra whatever percent, another 40% of the fake money, most players with his talent never play out the entire contract, right? Never even close. He played out the whole fucking thing. And then he even got broken off at the end with a little plus. So it wasn't a failure by any means, but he was never as good as people had hoped. Like he was never a top 10 quarterback, and he was always closer to 15, I think, than 10. And I think when they signed him, they never thought they were getting a top 5 guy, but I had envisioned him in those 5 games, I don't know, to be able to crack like the 8 to 12 kind of range consistently, and he just wasn't that guy. And one thing that kind of aged poorly once Purdy got in there is, God, he had some pretty fucking fantastic. We know how good the weapons are, but the offense looked way more explosive with a guy who was just a better player than him. The way Purdy played was just better than the way Jimmy played these last couple of years. I would say Jimmy's 19 season, he had a stretch of football that was really good, but it really was a little more short-lived than you realize.
Yeah, part of it we'll see. It felt like he was a more wide open player when he first arrived to the 49ers than what he became. Did Kyle Shanahan beat him down by the end in terms of don't make any mistakes, just do what I tell you to do. We'll run the football and play defense. I wonder if some parts of him got coached out of him. I don't know. It'll be interesting with Devontae. Devontae's a very good intermediate receiver, but he's also a good downfield receiver, and Jimmy doesn't do that.
Jimmy comes from the Patriots, though. It's a pretty buttoned up, like, check down, play within yourself, no turnovers.
Yeah, you're right.
But maybe you're right. Like his actual skill set, in theory, young version was probably a little more playmaking than that style.
Now
he's not the most accurate player.
Well,
right?
And you're right. He's not fundamentally. Maybe it did change. Maybe Kyle did stop letting him throw the ball downfield. Like ripped
his knee,
hurt his shoulder, right? Needed a shoulder surgery, but was not a very accurate downfield thrower. I mean, that was the one thing that was eye-opening. Was it felt like the 49ers were more aggressive as a passing team when Brock Purdy took over. So
one thing I was thinking, though, because like you would say Derek, not really either, and Derek has a better arm than Jimmy. There aren't really that many great down the field throwers because down the field throwing is really hard.
Yeah.
Like that is a huge plus when you get an explosive down the field passer. It's why like Mahomes, Josh Allen, Herbert, like they run circles around everybody. Joe Burrow feels pretty accurate on his touch passes down the field. Rodgers historically is viewed as one of the great quarterbacks ever. Why? Because he's very accurate on down the field throws. Because that is, if I can get 40 yards in one play, if I can do that on average a couple times a game, and when I'm really on several times a game, more often than not, you're going to have no shot against me, right? And it's what makes great quarterbacks. So is Jimmy really that different from everyone else? And that's always the pushback. Yeah, he's just kind of a guy. And now he's in a position, in a franchise that just historically pretty dysfunctional. It's not like they gave him nothing. I mean, how does he stay on the field? He gets hurt all the time. I have a hard time closing my eyes and going, yeah, the Raiders win 10, 11 games. Jimmy Garoppolo has a really good season. Don't you?
Yeah, I think it would be totally unlike the Raiders that we've seen in 20 years. Remember, Josh McDaniels just got the lowest, just got a poor NFLPA players grade. Now, we don't read too much into that, but, I think Jimmy's going to walk into high expectations again, which I don't think matters to him, but like that whole franchise is under the bright lights. Now, Jimmy's the one guy of everyone involved who's delivered in the bright lights recently. Well, that's not fair. I mean, Josh as an offensive coordinator delivered. Devontae obviously was great. But I mean, there's a lot of pressure on
Josh has never delivered as a head coach. When I saw this, and it clearly felt inevitable, because it makes more sense for Jimmy to go to Josh, a guy that he knows the offense specifically, than, even with D'Amico and those guys, because 99% they're going to take a quarterback at number 2. Maybe the Raiders don't take a quarterback in the first round, take him in the second round or whatever. He buys you a little time. And it feels like if this is a disaster, Josh McDaniels like a 2-and-done coach. Like making this signing, to me, the way the Derek thing ended, feels like there's some pressure on this operation, man. Especially the division's good. It's going to be difficult for Jimmy.
Well, imagine you're Mark Davis. You sign Josh McDaniels. I'm sure Josh told you I can win with Derek Carr when he signed. Well, he didn't. So now you sign his guy, right? I can win with this quarterback. Easy decision for Mark Davis. Doesn't cost him much. But I'm sure he had the conversation like, guys, what about a draft pick? It might be best for our franchise if we move up in the draft one of these guys. And maybe Mark didn't want to do it because he wanted to win now. Maybe those guys, maybe Ziegler told him these guys aren't worth doing it for. But you're right. I mean, these are...
Draft hasn't happened yet. They still, I guess, could, right?
You're right. They still could. You're right.
Happened to Jimmy before. Could happen to him again. Because the one thing you would say, he's proven to be really good around the guy, right? So you feel comfortable with that. But you have to like one of these guys, and they're going to be multiple quarterbacks off the board 100% before they pick. We know that for a fact. So they're getting the third, fourth guy, which in theory could be their second guy on the board. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean just because a guy's drafted ahead of you that you didn't like him. And they could even justify it's like, we didn't have to give him that much money. So if we find a guy we like, we can always pivot to him. But it's, things happen fast. And now there's pressure. Like Jimmy's going to be their starting quarterback 100% week 1. And the pressure on them is like they can't have another season like they had. I think at minimum they got to be above 500 for it not to be a disaster. Anything below 9-8, I think things could start getting weird and ugly. Do you agree with that?
I do.
At least 9-8, unless
you could be
the way
could
be hard in the AFC probably though. But yeah, it'd keep you alive. Now there's a different 9-8, right? Are you like pretty solid all season long, or are you like, 6-8 and win 3 of your last games? You were never making the playoffs, but you won a couple games late, and it looks a little different than it should,
Well, what happens? You're 9-8, and Garoppolo gets hurt, misses half the season. You don't really have another quarterback because you didn't prepare for that. I think that'd be a pretty negative reflection.
Right? They just lost their backup quarterback, who actually looks like he's shown some promise, right? Today.
Where do you go? Miami, Denver?
Denver signed him, yeah.
Miami got Mike White. Mike White just goes around poaching taking over locker rooms, winning locker rooms, and trying to take people's jobs. But I don't think there's any excuse if you sign Jimmy Garoppolo, he gets hurt. It's going well. Let's say it's whatever. You're 6-3. It's going well. Jimmy gets hurt. If I were Mark Davis, I wouldn't accept. Well, we were rolling and then he got hurt. And if you don't have another plan, that's on you.
Yeah.
I don't think you could accept that if you were Mark. So
we've seen that. Now Jimmy has a resume of getting injured a lot. And I do believe over the next month, there is going to be a lot of talk about, are the Raiders going to draft a quarterback with their top 10 pick? Like that's not going to go away just because they signed Jimmy Garoppolo. Unless over the next week, they sign like a Mike White Stidham type as well, right? So they basically pay for their 1-2 quarterback. Then you would be like little unlikely, right? If they buy like a $2 or $3 million backup, a Dalton, whoever. I like throwing that name out, but so you just go, this is going to be our quarterback this year. We're going to use our high picks to improve the talent around our roster. And then maybe next year we think about that at a later date, or maybe take a quarterback late in the draft. But
which is what Bill always did, right? Take a 4th or a 5th round quarterback, or even a 3rd round or whatever. Maybe they're like, there's no difference between the 4th best quarterback in this draft in terms of who's going off the draft board and Tanner McKee in the 2nd round.
Well, exactly. Like, and Josh would be like, we got Jimmy originally in the 2nd round, right? Like we've done that before. And you and I were talking, the Trey Lance trade, because the Bears, it's hard. I mean, there's so much bullshit out there. The stories flying left and right. They have not decided. They just wanted to do what the Niners did, so people don't nitpick when they're meeting with guys. They wanted to control their destiny. And I think there is probably some truth to that because relatively newer coach, right? So it's not like he's been there. The GM and the coach haven't worked together that long. The owner clearly getting his hands involved in stuff. That's pretty risky because history would show, and someone DM'd me this a while back. They're like, when you look at over the last decade, teams that get super aggressive and trade up, whether it's draft night before the draft, like RG3 or Wentz or the Niners, it hasn't worked out that well. When teams have just sat, over the last decade, whether it's, Justin Herbert, the Patriots did it with Mac Jones. They didn't have to give up anything like these other teams.
Yeah.
It puts an insane amount of pressure on the player. Because right now, Trey Lance, for example, if the Niners could get a redo on that, they would take a redo. And then everyone always comes, well, we don't even know. No, it's going into year 3. He's never started back-to-back games, and he is not the starting quarterback of the 49ers. And they gave up 2 first-round picks on top of flip-flopping. So, yes, they would like a redo on that. And I think there's an added element. If they had just stayed at 12 and taken Trey Lance, I think we would view him, and he would be discussed dramatically different, even though there'd be a lot of pressure in the way he's discussed, because it's fucking crazy how much they gave up to get him. And then when you factor in 2 years later, it's like, well, this pick led to Sean Payton, Tyreek Hill, and Bradley Chubb. You're like, that's insane. So it just, there's an element of when you can just sign Jimmy Garoppolo, it's easier to just kind of take a deep breath. The problem with Jimmy is he just gets injured a lot. And that's one thing I was watching Carr's press conference is one of the Saints report, he just and Derek made a joke, he's missed 3 games in his career because of injury. That one, I think a finger, or no, it was a hamstring or growing, remember Mario started the 1 game and then, maybe just the 2 games with the ankle. Derek plays.
And the playoff game.
But remember that, so that was the last game of the season, the playoff game, and then the 1 injury with Mariota. Carr plays, and then you don't really count the last 2 games. He made a joke. He's like, you got to add the other 2. But it was kind of funny. But the point is, there is value in that. If you're the Saints, doesn't mean he can't get injured. Weird shit happens. Russell never got hurt until he's kind of been hurt the last couple of years. You never know. But with Jimmy, like you said, there can be no excuse because more than likely it's going to be a weird injury. It's Jimmy might miss a month. You'd be like, with what? Yeah, the subflex of his butt muscle to his back. He can't bend over. You'd be like, what? But you can't. Tom Brady just never misses games. Just ever. And I would be very, very hesitant paying in free agency. You'd feel pretty good about McGlinchey. He's just going to play. So yeah, I overpaid a little bit, but he just plays in games. Jimmy.
Javon Hargrave.
What would you put Jimmy's over-under 2023 games? Could you put it over 10?
7.5, 9.5.
It's a lot for $35 million.
Yeah. But it's not. But to me, you draft a quarterback 7th, it changes the way I look at your Garoppolo's, right? It changes the way I look at the Garoppolo thing. Because then I go, oh, that's pretty inexpensive for a leader half a season. Maybe your starter is your rookie anyway by then. The one difference between what the Panthers just did and what the Niners did was the Panthers did it for the number 1 pick. The Niners did it to draft the 3rd best quarterback in the draft, in theory. They did it for the 3rd shot at the QB. If you had said the Niners did it blindly in that draft, it wouldn't have been blind because it was Trevor Lawrence. So there was a clear-cut number.
What the Niners did was crazier than what the Panthers did in terms of the mindset for the quarterback. Now, you could argue the Panthers, giving up a wide receiver who's under contract, who's sweet. The fuck are you guys doing? Who's your rookie quarterback going to throw to?
Yeah,
you got rid of McCaffrey. You get rid of now you're out of picks.
Right.
What are you going to do?
This is actually the year to have Mike White be your starting quarterback and just tank the season and build again. But from a QB standpoint, or go Jimmy Garoppolo, whatever.
Well, I think both deals were so good that it was pretty easy for the Dolphins and the Bears to say yes to. Are you sure? Like when they hung up, they looked like, I think we're really getting 2 extra ones, or I think they're going to give us a 1, a 2, and DJ Moore. It's like, yeah, I think we should tell them yes before they rethink this.
Yeah, they got an owner involved, you know? And again, the pressure goes right on Frank Reich is just right in the heart of it. All the heat's going to be on him to identify the right guy and to coach the right guy. And of course they might hit. They might. But I give them a little more credit because they're doing it for the number 1 pick.
Yeah. I don't
But
love
none of these
giving up
guys are
DJ
without.
Moore in the deal. Who else was
I know.
trading for it?
Which, you know, and that's the Bears. The flip side of it, the Bears looked at it like we can either take a shot at a quarterback or we can help the quarterback we have. Why don't we do that and see what we got? Pretty good little spot for Ryan Poles. Didn't draft this quarterback. Yeah, it's a good spot for Ryan Poles, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, because they got ammo next year. They could go and get one of the sweet guys, too, if this fails.
Let's see. Anything else happened since we started? Bears signed Tremaine Edmonds.
The one thing in free agency is you just got $50 million guaranteed. You got to spend so much money. And this is where the importance of building a team and drafting well and being able to extend your own guys relatively early, especially at, you know, certain positions, right? Tight end, wide receiver. Like if Deebo Samuel hits the open market and being able to extend him for $60 million, he gets an extra $25 million, right? So the ability to control your destiny by drafting well is really important. And I think for the most part, and this is why the 2 teams in the NFC represented, you know, the Niners and Eagles have drafted relatively well the last several years. They have a lot of core guys because you can't make a living at doing this because it puts too much pressure. Like you take Tremaine Edmonds, pay him $50 million. If he's not like a Pro Bowl level guy, it's like, that's hard. You know, like say this about Hargrave. I would say minimum 8 sacks.
It's
like
not a projection
pressure on him. Yeah, but there is pressure on him to play at a high level, right?
He can't have like you've seen him do it in a pressure. He already got paid once and delivered.
For sure. His history would say.
Makes you feel good about it.
This is a new year. Like he's got to keep kicking ass and taking names.
But I think, you know, you've always talked for years when we've talked free agency, it was one of the first, you know, takes I think you probably had when we started doing radio after you were in the NFL, which was NFL free agency is not plug and play. There are so many factors that change for players. And I think it goes back to the original point that you made about Hargrave, which is you are plugging him into a very similar situation. And he is similar to the guys that you have around him, right? You're not going, well, how does he produce without one of the league's best pass rushers next to him? Because he just played with one of the league's best pass rushers, and now he's signed to play with next to one of the league's best pass rushers. You know, so it'd be one thing if somebody else signed him that didn't have one of the league's best pass rushers. You go, well, is he really an 11-sack player if he's not playing next to Hassan Reddick or Nick Bosa? But the answer is, I don't know. Not our problem. We have Nick Bosa, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. So they spent a lot of money on a guy who checks a lot of boxes. This goes, the scouting report you gave on him earlier, I think was really telling because it helps you understand why the Niners were so comfortable giving a guy $40 million guaranteed.
Well, I just think there are certain players, like the elite of the elite, you could probably play most places and they're going to have success. Right? Like Devontae Adams could have gone to the Raiders. He could have gone to the Texans. He could have gone to the Giants. He could have gone to the Eagles. He's kicking everyone's ass. Tyreek Hill's so unique because you can hand him the ball. You can flip him the ball. You can give him quick screens. You can throw bombs. You can do so much. It wasn't – who was he racing?
Well, it's the Masters, so it's like older guys, I think.
Oh, so it was like – I expected him to – obviously, you knew he was going to win, but those weren't Olympians, right?
No, it's the Masters. So I think it's probably people over 30 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, there's certain players, you know, the high – Trent Williams. And then the next tier guys – are a little more scheme specific, To me, Hargrave is a good example of like he's scheme specific. He would not work in the defense Chip Kelly ran, like 3-4, hold the point, 2 gap, right? He's an up the field pass rusher. McGlinchey, like, you better be pretty run heavy. Like, to me, McGlinchey ain't working for Andy Reid, who wants to throw it 50 times a game. That would put Mahomes under some pressure. Or the Bills, who want to throw it a lot. Rightfully so. I would be very hesitant if, like, well, our pass to run ratio is going to skew high. Why? Because our best players are quarterback. I'd be like, I would try to find a better athlete than Mike McGlinchey, right? So this is where football, that second tier guy, in football, when they hit free agency, is expensive. Like Christian Kirk. Remember, everyone's like, Jesus, Jackson, well, he's got a quarterback who's actually kind of functional, and he had a really good season.
He had a good year, yeah.
You know,
so he got made fun of a lot last year.
Big time. And I think he ended the season with
and then the Kenny Galladay one got made fun of, and it was terrible.
So what was their issue, right? Quarterback play is not as good with the Giants.
Not according to the MMQB, the big look into the Giants' negotiation with his agents. They said they won because of Daniel Jones, according to Daniel Jones's agents. So the Giants, the first ask from the agents was $47 million a year for Daniel Jones.
I think one thing you have to do is when you have these younger quarterbacks under these cheap deals, you got to just quadruple down. Because when it changes, I think Howie would be like, we're playing a different world now, right? Andy would be like, we only get one shot on a yearly basis, and we got to make it count with a guy that's making, we can sign other players, but any contract over whatever, $15 million a year, we're getting maybe one bite of the apple.
Yeah.
And I think the 49ers still get a lot of wiggle room because that position that now averages like there are going to be so many players in the next year making $35+ million on the cap to count guys making 40, right? That's a huge chunk. This isn't a $400 million salary cap that you get extra wiggle room to be able to play. And the Niners now have never – it's really remarkable that they've been able to sustain this without the quarterback play of a Pro Bowl level, right, guy that you're like, we got to max this guy.
Well, I think you could argue, hearing you say that, John, that 23 and the Niners have had 3 NFC championship runs and 1 Super Bowl appearance, but that this year, given that it's not just your quarterback that's cheap right now, Nick Bosa is cheaper than he'll ever be this year. Brandon Ayuk is cheaper than he'll ever be this year. You just paid Debo, right? So he's not cheaper than he'll ever be, but we'll see what the next few years look like. But given that Bosa and Ayuk are cheaper than they will be again, this might be the year. This might be the year for them. The year and we'll see what happens with the Eagles. Like once Jalen Hurts gets paid, are they back in the Super Bowl again? Well, they are if he's good enough to carry them there, right? And he partly did that this year. He was an MVP candidate, but their whole team around him, their team is not going to look like it looked last year again.
Well, Darius Slay, they told him you got to find a trade partner unless you want to take a massive pay cut.
And he's probably not going to be the only corner they lose, right?
Well, no, the other guys are free agents.
Bradbury.
Did you say this might be the 49ers year to
yes.
Really take it?
Yeah.
Where I would push back is if Purdy is the quarterback, they'd have several. They would have another year after this because he wouldn't make any money.
They will have another year, but in that year, Nick Bosa and Brandon Ayuk are going to cost more money. So it may affect you somewhere else on the roster.
Oh, I see. Right? I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I'm not saying it's their only year. I'm just saying it might be their best talent that they have for the next 3 or 4 years. It might be this group.
The one thing with Bosa is because you're going to give him a long contract extension, you can kind of manipulate it all, right? Ayuk.
Yes.
Did you see the interweb? I don't know how true this is, which I understand when you just start looking at money on the team, would he be expendable? And there were some rumors that teams had called, sniffing around. Obviously, they wouldn't do it. I got news for everybody. If a wide receiver is going to go over the next 12 months, it's going to be the other guy. Now, I'm not saying that I would trade Debo, but it ain't going to be Brandon Ayuk. Because Brandon Ayuk, what his game is like a 15-year player. And God love Debo, and I appreciate, and football like when I watch NFL football, it's the physical. It's like what Debo brings to the table. But that is not a 15-year player. It's not even a 10-year player. Like it might, you talk about a guy in the year. It's like, well, 2 years ago, this year, like it might be like a 3-year kind of peak, which has been awesome. But under no circumstances, like if anything, I see Brandon Ayuk being one of the guys who's on the team for like a Kittle, Fred Warner like run when it comes to the head coach and what he values on this guy.
Yeah,
His
maybe not
focus,
as
his
high
seriousness.
highs, but maybe not as low lows.
Well, the other thing too is when you look at his money. Now, maybe quarterbacks are different because Daniel Jones comps, his stats aren't crazy good. So the way you get stupid money is when you get really crazy stats, right? Like ultimately, Debo had just a season where it's like, I carried you to the playoffs, scored like 11 touchdowns, ran for a G. Like, what are you talking about? Ayuk doesn't have like back-to-back 90 catch seasons. So if you were offering him an extension right now, it would actually, you might be able to get him cheaper. And if you're him, maybe you're like, well, play out another year. But I think Brandon Ayuk is not only going nowhere, I think he's going to be a part of this team as long as he's healthy for the duration of like Kyle Shanahan, like until he can't play anymore.
The beauty might be for Kyle is he's not a 90 catch guy for several years because there's so many guys right now to give the ball to. The beauty for Parag and John Lynch, right? I mean, his production, I think, is below his ability, in part because of the team he's on. If you took him and put him on a worse team, he might have 92 catches.
Oh, well, what would he do if you put him with Mahomes or Joe Burrow? I mean, he'd have an enormous season.
That's right. Or you put him on a good team with a great quarterback. Yeah. But I'm saying you might be able to put him on an average team without another offensive weapon, and he might have 95 catches on a shitty team. Maybe more, maybe 100 if he's the only guy to throw the football to.
You're saying if you like put him on the Giants?
Yeah, and it's just like a good, a ball hog on a bad team in basketball who just scores 28 points a game because, well, who else is going to shoot? Ayuk's numbers get suppressed because of how talented his team is, but it's not that he can't have a 95 catch season.
For 100%. Well, they're not a pass first team, and they're they throw the ball to the tight end a lot. When Purdy starts playing, they're going to run the ball with McCaffrey, whoever else is healthy, and just find ways to get Debo the ball behind the line of scrimmage, which is a high percentage play because he's to hand him and throw him a screen.
That's the other thing with Hargrave. If you're saying, all right, he's a better pass rusher than he is a run defender, fine. The Niners faced the 9th most pass attempts in the NFL last year. Great. Like, that's what they play. They run the ball on offense, and they play the pass on defense, actually.
Well, here's what else they do against the run. They have 2 linebackers and Hufanga that make tackles. Right?
They need to actually help their safeties out in the pass.
Hufanga in the run game kind of operates like an extra linebacker, doesn't he? One, he's up, he's closer to the line of scrimmage than he is back in the back. With Gibson, RIP, have a good run, hell of a run, Jimmy Ward. But so they got 3 linebackers because Alshire's gone. He's going to go somewhere else, and that's part of the business, right? Like this is, I think what makes football so unique to the other sports is just the natural turnover of just good players just constantly going other places. Like Hargrave is a high level player. He's going to play on 3 teams in a 3-year span, but it's not because pain in the ass. It's just the nature of the business. You just end up playing at different places, right? Like Jalen Ramsey, boom. Rams, Dolphins, you just move around. 28 years old. You just end up playing. Hopkins, the Cardinals surely probably trade him. It's just boom. Good players are just constantly moving around, and it has nothing to do. Typically, it's like, well, we got a new coach, and we're doing this scheme change and cap. We're going to try to balance this out. It's just the natural progression of dudes, and now the added element of high-end players getting traded nonstop. I think the NFL is running circles around everybody else. It just doesn't happen. Like in baseball, you just have the guy on a cheap contract for 6 years. You don't let him go. And in basketball, once I get a sweet guy, I just keep maxing him out.
Sorry, I was going to say baseball, you send him to an 8-year deal before anyone's heard of him.
For sure. Well, especially if you're the Braves or Seattle.
I think the Diamondbacks just did that with somebody. Like 8-year, $100 million contract.
I was flipping channels last night and ended up on Fox Sports 1, and it was America, Mexico. We got our ass kicked.
I didn't see any of that game. I saw the Great Britain game the day before. Who was on the mound for Team USA?
When I flipped it on, it was 7-1 in the 6th, and this guy named like Loop, and they were telling the story. He's an Angels reliever.
Yeah.
Who I didn't realize this, but the day before, he's like got who's their manager, like Scott Service or whoever the Angels manager is.
Oh, sorry. DeRosa's the MLB USA manager.
Yeah, whoever the manager of the Angels is, former player, calls this guy and he sees that it's the manager. Again, it's a former guy from like the 90s and the 2000s. He looks and goes, am I getting traded? Because he's like, why would this guy call me? And he calls him. He's like, hey, USA needs an arm. Would you be down? Because they love going to the guys here that are playing in Arizona.
Yeah.
He's like, hell yeah. He's like, I'll email you the directions. He just shows up and he's pitching yesterday. Because I saw a buddy at the golf course, Orlando, pitcher for UC Davis, played a little bit in the minors, listener to the podcast. He's buddies with Logan Webb, and I thought Logan was playing for Team USA because we were talking the other day. I was like, God, isn't Team USA Logan Webb? Is he their ace? He's like, no, he backed out. And all these guys, like if you think about some of the better American pitchers, like DeGrom ain't going to do it, Verlander, Scherzer ain't going to do it. And once Logan Webb guys back out, because he's like, our pitching staff sucks. But you see it's like Arenado, Trout, our lineup's pretty Pete Alonso, like
lineup's stacked. Trey Turner.
Yeah. I think our pitching is like the Angels. We got no pitching. But it makes sense because all of our high-end pitchers are all over 30, the American, and they're never going to do this event, right?
No, it's not worth it. They're not up to speed yet. Not in mid-season form. They're going to hurt themselves.
Is this spread out throughout the world? Like, is Ohtani playing in Japan right now, and we're playing here in Chase Field?
Yeah. Trying to see if Shlomo Lipitz pitched for Team Israel yesterday. He's 44 years old. He's thrown 22 innings of professional baseball in his entire life. And I think he throws like a 77-mile-an-hour fastball.
Where's their group?
Russia? I don't know. They played Nicaragua yesterday somewhere. I didn't see that game. Let's see, did Lipitz didn't pitch? No, Shlomo didn't pitch.
World Baseball Classic, in theory, makes a lot of sense. In reality,
Jock Peterson on Team Israel.
I think it's a tough haul around.
Really hard because the pitching is what makes it really complicated. You know,
I just mean like March Madness, free agency, it gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah.
I think there's a time where it would kind of work.
It would work during baseball season.
Yeah, like June.
Just shave, like hockey in the Olympics. They just stop for a while.
I feel like March Madness, you might need to move that away from NFL free agency week. It's going to be hard. Gets lost in the shuffle a little bit.
Yeah, first four start tomorrow.
You agree that it feels like today, historically, and throughout our life, March Madness week, it's like, what do you get? Aaron Rodgers is like going to get talked about. It's going to be hard to just get the real estate that they used to have.
Yeah. It's time to learn identify where True TV is again, the annual True TV search.
Oh, yeah, good point.
That's where the first four games are. They give you Tuesday and Wednesday to figure that out.
Bobby Hurley made the Final Four, right? Or the last four?
But last four, first four. Last four in is first. You play in the first four. So they're playing Nevada, which is actually a sneaky good game. Anything else right now? We'll see if other stuff happens. But I guess Kawakami, if you're listening to this or watching this after the fact, Kawakami said the Niners could be ready to make another big move today.
Feels more like a trade than because there aren't players, like any good players already signed.
Well, I guess nobody is technically signed, right?
Yeah, but these deals are pretty much handshake, wink.
Right.
It's pretty rare for like McGlinchey's actually on the Bears now. Like that has not been happening the last couple of years. So my point is like a splash. Like there aren't even splashy names. Hargrave, you could argue, is the best free agent of the group. And he was gone, in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know who they would get.
Feels like a trade.
Who would they trade?
Well, like trade pick for somebody.
Trade a pick?
Like 2000.
7 5s?
No, like 24 first for.
Are they going to pre-trade the McGlinchey comp pick? Or the Niners going to get like a fourth for McGlinchey? Because he's going to end up being one of the top paid guys of this free
Yeah,
agency.
but it balances out who like if they had signed nobody,
true.
they
They
would have
signed
got a
Hargrave.
third, but they just paid 40, so it's kind of balances out.
That's a good point.
They got the market cornered, with the coaches and the execs that they don't need to worry about that as much, do they? Because they got ones coming next year, correct? Like they're still owed 2 threes next
comps.
year.
Yeah, because you can only get so many coach comps. You only get 3 coach comps in one season.
Well, because I saw when the comps were announced last week, everyone's like, "Oh my God, the 49ers!" Well, we'd already known about the threes, right? So it wasn't actually.
We've known about all of them. In fact, the projections from like 2 weeks prior were almost exact. They missed by a pick. The Niners ended up 1 spot higher than the projections.
But let's be real. Like 6th and 7th round comps aren't as cool as like the threes, especially when you don't have a 1st or 2nd round pick. Like what would the 49ers draft be if they didn't have these guys getting jobs? That they wouldn't have 1st, 2nd, 3rd. They wouldn't be picking till fucking the Daniel Jeremiah starts throwing to the zoo animals, That's if you don't have a pick Thursday or Friday, I can't really take your draft seriously. The threes add some urgency because they could always trade up into the 2nd round. Like Friday matters for the 49ers.
Yeah.
If the Rams have had days where they don't even show up till Saturday.
They don't even have a press conference.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, when something else happens, we'll be here. Ridgeway to the where do you go? Texans. Niners re-sign Kevin Givens. Gibson was a good last-minute signing last year. Re-signs.
Got a raise.
What did he get? $2 million? $3 million?
2.9, I think.
Yeah. Good. I mean, he started 17 games for them. That's a hell of a deal.
Yeah, I mean, went from league minimum to tripling your salary. Which feels, it's like, well, can we make that 5?
I know. I thought the same thing. But then the team was like, hey, we are tripling your salary. So isn't that sound?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, it sounds great in theory, but.
Well, that sounded great to Mostert, and like a year later, his agent was having a hissy fit. Remember?
It's true. But did Mostert ever start 17 games?
No, Mostert, like, if he has a month straight of being on the field, it's a major win.
End of an era, John. McGlinchey and Garoppolo gone.
I guess the Jimmy G will factor into comps too. So you got 35 guaranteed. You got McGlinchey's 50. The pendulum right now is not losing more than they're taking in.
Losing in a good way, yeah.
Because Jimmy counts, right?
Jimmy counts.
Yeah, Jimmy counts.
Not big quarterback money, but
good enough.
I mean, Jimmy signed for less than Hargrave, guaranteed.
But Jimmy got more than like Charvarius got last year. It's shitty quarterback money, but relative to most free agents, like how many free agents in this class are getting $35 million?
How about Jimmy,
guaranteed?
Man? You said it earlier, but it's
cockroach, man. He won't die.
Just an unbelievable 34. Like, Jimmy only got $34 million guaranteed. Only.
I bet Jimmy tells you when he's just a fantastic looking 49-year-old and just struggling to get out of bed, like, listen, man, my shoulder doesn't work. I got knee tendonitis. Jimmy might be in some pain when he's older. He doesn't feel like a painful guy, though, like the way he just moves and walks, but
doesn't feel painful.
He's got a lot of injuries. Shoulders, knees, thumbs, foot. What did he just shatter his foot?
Yep. And that's one that who knows if it bounces, if it comes back, But
stay locked in.
All right, y'all. Stay vigilant. Stay vigilant.